Hey there, everybody. Welcome to your Evolutionary Herbalism Student Q&A webinar. I want to thank you all so much for being here with me. And, this is an opportunity for you all to get a chance to just be here with me live and to ask me any questions that you might have, and for me to have an opportunity to just interact and support you on your plant path. And I want to thank you all very much for being a part of the Evolutionary Herbalism community. Whether you're, been a long-time student or whether you're a new student, thank you very much for being a part of the work that myself and my wife and our team has spent a lot of time and energy and love putting into creating these programs and figuring out how to deal with technology and put it all up online so all of you can study what I see as this very important work. And whether you're in astroherbalism or botanical constellations or alchemical herbalism or the Vitalist Herbal Practitioner Program, Materia Medica Monthly, no matter where you're at, all of this work is also integrated together. I wanted to take this time to do this live call or webinar with you here to answer any questions that you might have. And I also have a super big announcement. I have a feeling that you all probably have heard about it by now, but my book, Evolutionary Herbalism, Science, Spirituality, and Medicine from the Heart of Nature, is all ready for you. It is now available and Amazon is shipping it out. Apparently there was a few delays on the shipping, but you can now get the book. That book has been a long time coming. I started that book 7 years ago, I think, was when I had my first draft. And it took a long time to get it all together, and a lot of lighting fire under my ass to get me to work on it and get it done. But it's done, and I'm really happy it's done. And so hopefully y'all have had a chance to pick up a copy of it. Maybe it arrived in your mailbox this week. And I want to thank you to any of you that did pick up a copy. And I really hope that you enjoy reading it, because this book is, regardless of what program you're in, this book is really going to lay out for you kind of my whole philosophy and approach to herbal medicine. And hopefully, as you engage in the book and with the program that you're in, you'll start to get a sense for my approach to working with plants and working with people and helping people and bringing that healing into their lives, whether that's on their body or the mind or the heart or on that spiritual level too. I believe that this approach to herbal medicine holds a great deal of power for us to be able to help a lot of people and to be in service to our families, our communities, our clinics, whatever scale your work with herbal medicine is. I really hope that you can get the support and the training and the teachings that you need here at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. So thank you very much for being here with me. And yes, so if y'all, it's looking like some of y'all are maybe having a little bit of issues. Sometimes if you refresh the page, sometimes closing some other apps, if you got a bunch of apps on your computer or phone that are running in the background, that can really delay things. So it's good to close as many things as you can so that you'll be able to stream the video okay here. And this is being recorded, and I'm going to be posting it up in the members area, so y'all will be able to get the recording of this later on. This time is really for you. I don't have like a bunch of curriculum and class and stuff like that put together, because I really want to take this time to focus on you, to focus on your questions, and to support you in any way that I can. So for those of you that have not been here with me for a webinar, there's a certain way that we got to go about doing questions, because I can see that the chat roll is cruising right along here. And sometimes the questions can get lost in everything there. So when you type your message in, there should be a little option there, like maybe 3 little dots somewhere around there, and there's an option for you to mark your comment as Q&A. And that way it'll just keep it nice and organized, and I can see all your questions. And I can get all your questions there in nice little organized space there. So with that, I am going to be answering your questions. So bring your questions in, mark it as Q&A, and I'm going to jump right in here and see if we've got everything. So let's see. Casey is asking, what would you say are the best herbs to repair and strengthen the nervous system? If there are more than one, how are they different? Yeah, great question there, Casey. So generally speaking, when we're talking about herbs and the nervous system, we're looking at an overarching category that we typically refer to as nervines. And nervine is actually kind of a vague category. Basically just means that it's an herb that's influencing the nervous system. It's actually more of an affinity than it is an action. But for all intents and purposes, we generally categorize it as an herbal action. So there's kind of subcategories in that nervine category that I think are really helpful to get more specific. Generally, when you see an herb noted as being nervine, it generally is associated with plants that are going to be kind of calming and sedative and relaxing to the nervous system. Technically, coffee is a nervine, right? Because it's influencing the nerves, but it's more of a nervine stimulant. And there's not a whole lot of nervine stimulants that we work with, medicinally speaking. There's a few, but for the most part, we're working more with the ones that are calming the nervous system down. So the way I like to categorize nervines is we've got your nervine, kind of your basic nervine sedatives or relaxants. These are going to be your more gentle nervous system type remedies. These are generally plants that you can use throughout the day. They're not going to make you overly tired or sleepy or groggy, but they will kind of help cut the nervous edge off, right? And that's kind of more mild ones like lemon balm or chamomile, motherwort, blue vervain, things like that. Then we have what we would refer to as nervine hypnotics. These are your much stronger really sedative plants, right? The ones that usually, as the term implies, hypnotic, so they can kind of make you feel hypnotized, so to speak. Basically that they can make you feel kind of tired. And these are usually the ones we use more at the end of the day to help you get sleep, or for people that have really severe like nervousness, anxiety, they're freaking out, and we really want to kind of sedate them. Those are usually our stronger ones: valerian, hops, passion flower, skullcap, pedicularis, things like that. Then we have this category that you're referring to, which would be our nervine trophorestoratives, or you'll sometimes see them called nervine tonics. And this is the category of plants that are not necessarily sedating you or calming you down or making you feel sleepy, but they're more like food for the nervous system. They're just helping to nourish and strengthen and rebuild a burned out nervous system. That's what the old doctors called that is neurasthenia, or nervous burnout. And actually, you know, a lot of what people in the modern practice kind of call like adrenal burnout is actually, it's more often than not actually nervous system burnout than it is actually endocrine burnout. True endocrine burnout, you're pretty sick generally at that point. It's not just like, oh, I feel kind of tired. It's like endocrine burnout's usually pretty serious. So a lot of people experience more nervous system burnout than they do actual true endocrine or adrenal burnout. It is real, but it's a little less common than I think a lot of people would make it out to be. So some of my favorite nervine trophorestoratives, hands down, number one, the top remedy here is milky oats or Avena sativa. Specifically, we're talking about the milky oat seed, the fresh seed that is in the latex producing stage. So, there's two remedies we use from oats, right? You've got the oat grass or oat straw, which is more nutritive, it's more minerals, but the milky oat seed is our really primo nervine trophorestorative. And what's important about that remedy is that, to get that property out, it has to be a tincture of the herb. A lot of those properties in the latex are alcohol soluble and fresh. So you really want a fresh tincture of milky oat seed. Generally, a mid-range alcohol, 50-60% alcohol is adequate to get all of the trophorestorative properties out of it, and it's amazing. It works really, really well. It sometimes takes time for people to really notice the effects, but it's really indicated for that kind of excess vata, excess nervous, not sleeping very much, really stressed all the time, just kind of burned out feeling. Really, really excellent there. The second remedy that I've used a lot here is skullcap. That's Scutellaria lateriflora. And skullcap generally is classified under the nervine hypnotic category. And that always really confused me, because every time I would take skullcap, I wouldn't really feel a super deep sedated effect from it. And I was like, taking pretty high doses of it, right? Like tablespoon doses of the tincture. And one thing I realized over the years is that actually the tincture of skullcap is a little more focused on the restoring the nervous system side of things, whereas the tea of skullcap, or an infusion, that's where the hypnotic property really comes through. And specifically, you can't boil it, right? You don't want to pour boiling water over skullcap. You actually want to, boil the water, take the lid off, let it sit for a few minutes, and then infuse your skullcap in that hot water. Something about the boiling water, that high temperature, does something to the constituents in skullcap that renders it significantly less effective. I remember the first time I had an infusion of skullcap like that, and it was like, whoa, it was kind of one of those things where the eyebrows went up and the eyelids went down. And it was like, whoa, I can really tell why they call it skull cap, right? Because it felt like this big heaviness settling over kind of the top of my head. And it's very pleasant for most people. So those two are really top nervine trophorestoratives. We also got St. John's wort here, is really excellent. And we also have lion's mane mushroom, which is a really excellent trophorestorative for the nervous system. And then the fifth one that comes to mind here is ashwagandha, or Withania somnifera, is really, really good for restoring a burned out nervous system. Oh, the other one here is another Ayurvedic remedy is Tribulus terrestris. I believe the Sanskrit name of it is Gokshura. It's a puncture vine, Tribulus, a really restorative for, in Ayurveda, they classify it as a vata restorative remedy, so for that nervousness. So those are some of the remedies that immediately come to mind there, Casey. Great question. Let's see. Jean is asking, do you ever use fluids excreta test results? I'm not sure. Maybe you can clarify that question. I'm wondering if you're talking about actual laboratory analysis of, I'm assuming you're referring to blood or urine or stool. If that is what you're asking, then yes, definitely. If people come and they've gotten, certain blood work done or certain tests done, labs done, and things like that, I definitely like to know what kind of information is on those labs and on those reports. So yeah, I definitely will use that. I don't rely on them, but sometimes I will encourage people to go get certain labs done. If someone comes to me and they say, they're saying, oh, I've got parasites, well, I really want to know if they got parasites, right? Because anti-parasitic herbs are strong, and you really don't want to give someone a whole bunch of those herbs if they actually don't have a parasite, and maybe they just have some other form of imbalance in their digestive system. So there are times where I will, refer someone to go get some work done to just really make sure we know what's going on before we get them started on a protocol. I remember I was talking to Matthew Wood about this a lot, and we were talking about just assessment. As herbalists, how do we go about assessing people and figuring out what's going on for them? And both of us are really on the same page with that, where we can, whereas we may not use or prefer to use, more allopathic Western medicines, it doesn't mean we have to throw the whole system out, one thing that I would say modern medicine is really advanced with is diagnostics, right? We have instruments and abilities to see into the body and understand what's going on in the body in ways that, the ancients could have only dreamed of, right? And there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to use that kind of information. So, but I think it's also important to not to be overly reliant on them, right? That we want to have and develop really good interview skills. We want to develop good intake and evaluation skills, such as reading the tongue or reading the pulse. From my approach, the medical astrology is really big there. Some people use iridology. Some people use hand or foot reflexology. Lots of different ways that we can learn what's going on inside the body. And I say the more that you know about that kind of stuff, the better, because the more, each one's like a different perspective, a different angle on what's going on for that person. And the more perspectives you have, the more well-rounded your understanding is, and generally the easier it'll be for you to figure out what is going on at the root level so that you can best treat it. So yeah, great question there, Gene. Kyra is asking, can you talk about adrenals a bit and which herbs you tend to favor for different types of energetics? Yeah, great question there, Kyra. So the adrenal glands are part of the endocrine system, right? They sit right on top of the kidneys, hence adrenal. So renal is kidney and ad is on top of. So adrenal, they sit on top of the kidneys. So there's two of them. Generally, the kind of basic anatomy of the adrenals is there's two main layers. You have the adrenal cortex and you have the adrenal medulla. And it used to really confuse me. I always got those mixed up. And the way I remember is that the medulla is in the middle, right? So the cortex is kind of the outside of the adrenals and the medulla is in the middle. And basically what the adrenal glands do is that their entire responsibility is basically connecting our nervous system and our endocrine system, right? And so what we have is they're a part of what's called the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And what the overall responsibility of the adrenal glands is to produce and secrete hormones that are in response to stressors, right? It's basically triggered by the sympathetic nervous system that basically the sympathetic nervous system plugs into the adrenal glands and triggers their release of stimulant hormones, right? Norepinephrine, epinephrine, or what we generally refer to more commonly as like adrenaline, right? That is that stimulation. The adrenal glands also produce and secrete a hormone referred to as cortisol. And cortisol is like our body's natural anti-inflammatory substance, right? I mean, that's the basis of what cortisone or prednisone are, right? Is there these these anti-inflammatory compounds, very, very powerful. And so what ends up happening is that when people are under prolonged periods of very high levels of stress, the sympathetic nervous system is kind of dominating their autonomic nervous system. On top of that, with high levels of inflammation running, the adrenal glands can get kind of worn out over a period of time. And as I was mentioning briefly earlier, that a lot of people's nervous systems actually get burned out before the adrenal glands actually get burned out. Which is why I actually tend to prefer working with the nervine trophorestoratives before jumping into giving people a whole bunch of adaptogens. But the high levels of inflammation can actually be incredibly taxing on the adrenal glands as well. And another facet of the adrenals is that, and this is especially important in female health, whereas in menopause, as the ovaries begin to atrophy, right? They're no longer manufacturing androgen hormones, most notably estrogen. And because of that, we'll typically see these major hormonal fluctuations in regards to estrogen during menopause, but the body still needs a certain degree of estrogen to function properly, and that role and responsibility goes to the adrenal glands. Now, if someone going into menopause already has, worn out or depleted adrenals, then that process of menopause typically is quite a bit more difficult and more challenging, and requires a bit more intervention from a therapeutic standpoint to help the body to be supported to continue to manufacture these all-important hormones. So in that regard, generally speaking, when we're looking at herbs and their association with the adrenal glands, we're looking at the category of adaptogens. Now, if you notice, I put quotes there, and this is because there's dispute amongst herbalists in regards to the whole adaptogen category, right? Basically, the way I was taught, and this is, the perspective really brought out by Paul Bergner, is, he says there really isn't a whole lot of great research showing that adaptogens are actually directly rebuilding and restoring the adrenal glands, right? He was saying, we always say these herbs rebuild the adrenals, but we haven't actually really, from a scientific standpoint, proven that these herbs rebuild the adrenals, right? But some other herbalists say, no, they absolutely do. So there's a little bit of conflict in regards to that. But regardless of all of that, what we do know is that a lot of these adaptogens do help with really the symptomatic patterns that tend to be associated with burnout, right? Whether that's nervous system burnout, endocrine burnout, etc. So in terms of energy, you're asking about energetics, there's kind of a spectrum here in terms of tissue state qualities that tend to manifest here. So the people that generally are on the track towards nervous system burnout or endocrine burnout, we would define Ayurvedically as a Vata constitution. They tend to be very tense, anxious, nervous, high-strung, not sleeping well. They just have more of that nervous disposition, and their autonomic nervous system tends to be excessive on the sympathetic fight or flight side of things, right? And it fits really nicely with one of the core emotional attributes of Vata, which is fear, right? And that's really what the sympathetic nervous system is like the body being like, oh shit, like there's a threat to our survival, run away or fight it off, right? And that basically is a fear state. In terms of the tissue states, that is the wind tension tissue state. And that tissue state and that constitution, Vata constitution, always responds very well to nervines, right? Generally, we want to, relax and sedate and calm them down. And then again, giving those nervine trophorestoratives I was mentioning to help to restore and kind of rebalance the nervous system, rebuild and restore a depleted nervous system. And then if over time where it's feeling like the person is still not really responding to that, that's when we can move in with some adaptogens such as, ashwagandha, rhodiola, schizandra berry, North American ginseng, Panax quinquefolius. I don't really use the red Chinese ginseng very much. Eleuthero, or what we used to call Siberian ginseng, is a big one here. Let's see. Those are some of the main herbs that I personally have worked with. There's another one, the spikenard, Aurelia. There's the California spikenard. There's also the more East Coast spikenard. Those are really, really effective. A lot of these are root medicines that I've found to be best in that category. And a lot of them are warming. A lot of them are drying. Aside from licorice is a great remedy here. Licorice is really nice to incorporate because it has a moistening effect. And the other energetic that's really important to remember about rhodiola is that plant in particular, as well as schizandra, are very, very astringent, really, really astringent. So we got to be a little careful with those ones. Those are some of the main remedies that I personally have worked with to help to restore people that are really burned out. They're just fatigued, they're exhausted, they're completely wiped out. And I think what's important with these types of remedies is that, we see them being used allopathically a lot, especially in kind of the phytopharmaceutical world or the nutraceutical world or the supplement world, right? Is you see all these formulas that are like, they literally have like every adaptogen known to man in them, and it's just like a little bit overkill, and they're like having people take really high doses of it, and high doses of a lot of these herbs can actually be overstimulating, right? And if you've ever taken really high doses of ginseng before, it can really rev you up, and that actually is shifting it too far in the other side of the equation, right? So if you picture someone's burned out, right? Their nervous system's burned out. Maybe they have adrenal burnout. They're exhausted. They're tired. They're wiped out all the time. And then they take a really big dose of ginseng. And now they're like, wow, I feel great. I feel all this energy and I feel energized and stimulated, basically, right? And they're like, yeah. And then they go. And they're like, no, I can keep going. I still have energy. Right? And then they keep doing it. They're actually pushing themselves beyond their physiological capacity, and they're actually burning themselves out even more. This is really true with some of our more stimulating ones, especially the Chinese red ginseng. We see this with cordyceps. We see this with, what's the other one? Eleuthero can be that way as well. So we just have to be careful. I generally like to give more, moderate doses of these herbs over a little bit of more of an extended period of time. If someone is feeling acutely like stimulated from the herb, they're taking too much. So those are just a little bit of insights into my sense of the adrenals and some adaptogen stuff. So yeah, thank you for the great question there, Kyra. Let's see. I hope I'm saying your name right. Zarad is saying, I apologize if I totally butchered your name. I have long worked with comfrey and find it amazing. As you should, it's an amazing plant. Energetically, I consider it moistening and slightly astringent. I would agree with that. That's kind of one of the interesting things about comfrey, right? Very mucilaginous, but yet astringent and wound healing at the same time. So it's kind of a little bit of a paradox, actually. Okay, but cooling or warming? What do you think? Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, to me, comfrey is pretty neutral. Neutral to slightly cool, I would say, because, you know, it will help to decrease a bit of inflammation around wounds and things like that. But for the most part, I actually find comfrey to be pretty neutral. I don't think it's cool enough that, you know, someone that with a cold constitution is going to feel overly cold from it. I would say the predominant energetics of it are really that mucilaginous moistening quality and that tonifying astringent quality. So yeah, very good question there. Natalia is asking, I'm a bit concerned with the alcohol consumption with tinctures. How much is too much? Does it have to be taken special case in cases of inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis? I'm taking 4 different tinctures and I'm having issues in knowing how to dose them. Yeah, good question there, Natalia. So I don't really think there's too much to worry about here if you're taking what were generally considered pretty standard doses. You know, a lot of folks start about 30 drops 3 times a day. Which is a 30 drop dose is about a milliliter. So if you're doing 4 different tinctures or formulas at that dosage, that's about 12 milliliters a day, which isn't too much. There's certainly, you know, some herbalists dose some things 5 milliliters 3 times a day. But certainly that's not too much. I don't think we have to be concerned too much about it being overly taxing on the liver or anything like that. You know, even people that have acute liver disease still taking like things like milk thistle tincture, dandelion tincture, things like that, still really, really helpful. I don't think we really have anything to worry about unless we're, you know, working with someone that maybe has problems with alcohol. In the sense of like they're an alcoholic, right? In those kinds of situations, it's best to just avoid tinctures altogether and using something. A lot of folks turn to glycerites. I'm not a huge fan of glycerites, but a lot of people really like them. They taste nice. Powders, infusions, decoctions, capsules, really, really good there as well. I'm not totally sure about your specific example here of rheumatoid arthritis. I can't imagine why alcohol would be a problem in a situation like that. You know, I would just say, you know, maybe it's getting to be a bit much if you're starting to feel a little tipsy, but you know, you'd have to be taking really high doses of your tinctures to start to feel a little tipsy from the alcohol there. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. If it is something that is very concerning to you, I would maybe encourage you to try a different form of administration, perhaps powders, infusions, or even capsules can be a good way to go. If you are going to do capsules, I really would say the best way to do that is to get as fresh a herb as possible, powder it and capsule it yourself. A lot of the capsules that you can get at the store, it's just like who knows how long that's been sitting there, who knows how long ago it was powdered and things like that, and just the quality can be kind of questionable there. So yeah, that's my take on that. Great question, Natalia. Let's see, Hillary is asking, wondering when do you think you'll be adding the homework prompts, quizzes, and tests to the program? Yes, good question there, Hillary. Hopefully soon. It's been a really big process transitioning all the programs over to our new system that actually give us the ability to do the homeworks and quizzes and things like that. So we're still in the process of trying to get all the tracking set up there so we can have make sure we're seeing how everyone's completing the lessons and really engaging with the program. So we're still in the process of getting all that set up. It's pretty techy and there's been a pretty steep learning curve there for us, but we're figuring it out. And you know, hopefully as we get all of that dialed in, the next layer of development is incorporating quizzes and tests. I can't give you, I don't know when all of that is going to be done. You know, I do have plans to basically redo all of the programs, which is like a massive project. It's going to take me probably a few years to do all of that, to revamp all the curriculum, all the notes, reshoot all the videos, everything from the ground up. And when we do that, we'll definitely have quizzes and tests in there. But because that is going to take some time, I would like to try to get some things incorporated into the modules before then, because I know some of y'all are really looking forward to that. So it is on the to-do list, but I can't tell you when for sure that will be done. But thank you for the encouragement to keep on with that. We appreciate it. We've been getting requests for that a lot over the years, and we've just been working real hard trying to figure out all the tech to make that feasible and manageable, and hopefully easy for you all to work with, so, and us too. So let's see. Sasha is asking, Nervine Trophorestoratives, your formula of skullcap, milky oat, St. John's wort, is the formula equal parts of each? What is the dose for someone with panic disorder and anxiety disorder? Kapha, Pitta, Constitution, but this formula is constitutionally balanced, right? Great question there, Sasha. Okay, so yes, generally this formula is pretty constitutionally balanced, right? We've got skullcap is cooling, bitter, drying, right? And then we have milky oats is pretty temperature neutral, maybe a little bit cooling, but not too bad. And then definitely a bit more on the moistening side with milky oats. And then St. John's wort is warming, because it's kind of got that a little bit oils in it, a little aromatic. And then drying. So on that sense, yes, it is relatively constitutionally balanced there. You know, if someone is really, really dry, the formula might be a little further on the drying side. So you might incorporate something like maybe a little bit of licorice in there to moisten it up more, or bump up your milky oats. You can use these in equal parts for sure. It just keeps it really simple. You can also have this be the lead of a formula that then has more sedatives and hypnotics in it if you need to acutely calm someone down. So you're talking about panic disorder, anxiety attacks, and things like that. This is going to be a really great 3-herb formula to build and restore their nervous system over time. But I would say, you know, we want to help, and this is a good teaching point here where, you know, obviously we want to get to the root causes of people's issues, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't alleviate their suffering in the process too, right? And so, because I know sometimes, and I think maybe I get a little misunderstood sometimes. I think people sometimes think I'm really like bagging on allopathic herbalism and things like that. It has its place, right? Sometimes we just need to help someone to alleviate their suffering and get them feeling better, right? And so this is a situation where I would encourage you to explore working with perhaps some stronger hypnotics and nervine sedatives to calm the person down more acutely throughout the day. So maybe you have a formula that is primarily some of these stronger hypnotics, and then you could use the skullcap, milky oat, St. John's wort as a support. So they are getting sedated to chill them out, but at the same time we're also replenishing and restoring the nervous system as well. One thing that I would note here that is actually really, really helpful, and it's kind of more of a lifestyle thing, is actually attending to people's breakfast. I've had a number of teachers say that, and I've experienced it myself too with clients that have a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness, and a good question to ask is figure out what they eat for breakfast. And oftentimes you'll find they skip breakfast, or maybe they eat a really sugary breakfast, or maybe they just have some coffee for breakfast. So one of the best things for panic attacks or anxiety is to get people to have a very protein-dense breakfast. One of our teachers in Ayurveda, he recommends lamb stew. That's his protocol for people with anxiety. He doesn't even really give them herbs. He just gives them lamb stew for breakfast. It's warm, it's oily, it's grounding, it's super nutrient dense, and just starting people's day off with it doesn't have to be lamb stew. I mean, lamb stew is great for breakfast. It's easy to digest and blah, blah, blah. But just getting them a really good protein dense breakfast is awesome. So yes. And so if their constitution is Kapha Pitta, that would be their core constitution. But if they're having a lot of anxiety and panicking and stuff like that, that would mean their Vikruti, or the assumed current constitutional state, is primarily Vata. So we want to treat that Vata pattern there. Great question, Sasha. I hope that helps. Let's see. Okay, Jessica is asking, can you talk a bit more about Vitex and how to know when it is recommended? Last Q&A, you debunked what I'd always heard, that it would balance both estrogen and progesterone. Yeah, great question there, Jessica. So yes, Vitex is one of those herbs that unfortunately there's kind of a lot of, I don't know how this happens, but there is a pretty good amount of misinformation out there on this plant, just being perpetuated that, Vitex is this kind of miracle, silver bullet that will just balance all your hormones out magically. And unfortunately, that's really not the case. So as I said, that Vitex is, Vitex agnus castus, also called chaste tree berry, is a progesteronic plant, right? So that means that it directly increases progesterone. So in situations where a woman already has elevated progesterone in relationship to estrogen, or they have a more estrogen deficiency, this herb is quite contraindicated. Generally speaking, when we're seeing a excess progesterone deficiency estrogen kind of pattern, we generally see lower energy, more of a melancholic, kind of depressed, sad disposition in the person. Whereas the reverse, estrogen, we'll see maybe a little bit more of an irritable, nervous, anxious, it's more of a higher energy state. So that's a really good differentiating factor there, to kind of tell the difference there between the progesterone estrogen pattern. There's a lot more that could be gone into that, but generally speaking, that's when we want to apply Vitex. Because this is one of those herbs that is typically very scientifically kind of looked at, it's very common for people to really overlook the energetics. And one of the things about Vitex is this, use the little berries or seeds. They're really pungent, right? I mean, it tastes like black pepper. So this herb is pretty contraindicated for women that have excess heat in their tissue states or constitutionally. So it's really indicated for more of a Kapha, Vata, cold pattern there, basically. Yeah, so that's just some thoughts on Vitex. For those of you that, if you're in the Vitalist program, be sure to look at the module on the female reproductive system, and I go really, really deep in there on the whole progesterone estrogen dynamic there, and you can get a lot of details in there for that. But that's the main thing about Vitex that we have to really keep in mind. Okay. Sharon is asking, how exact do you get when making tinctures? I know it's important to have certain percentages of water and alcohol. Is there an equation you use? I'm starting an apothecary garden and will be making my own tinctures. Yeah, great question there, Sharon. So generally, I generally am pretty precise. I'm not as precise as some, but I'm a lot more precise than others. Some people just, every herb, they'll just pour some brandy over it and call it good. Basically, this is one of the areas where knowing some chemistry can be really helpful. Knowing what constituents are in the plant and knowing what their overall solubility is, meaning whether they are, in terms of plant chemistry, you've got a spectrum. You've got water-soluble chemicals and you've got alcohol-soluble chemicals. And most tinctures are a blend of alcohol and water. So Generally speaking, on the water side, you've got things that are like polysaccharides and flavonoids and tannins. Those usually use lower percent alcohol, maybe 25 to 40%. And then up here, you've got your things like essential oils and resins, and really highly alcohol soluble compounds. Those we're generally going to be doing 70 to 95% alcohol, and then everything else kind of lays somewhere in the middle, right? So it's good to really look at the chemicals that are in the plant and know their solubility range. That being said, a lot of people have already done that and figured out some good general rules of thumb for what percentage of alcohol you should use for those plants. And I'm just gonna, a good one is Herbal Medicine from the Heart of the Earth by Cheryl Tilgner. Let's see, I'm gonna type it into the chat roll here. Herbal Medicine from the Heart of the Earth by Cheryl Tilgner. So that book right there is really good. And then another one, I can never remember it. What is it? Pharmacognosy and Pharmacy for the Practitioner of Botanical Medicine by Eric Yarnell. That one's really good too. That one gets a little more into the chemicals and the chemistry and their solubility, but for those of you interested in that, that's a really good resource there. And then there's the Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook by James Green. And that's just a good book for preparation and medicine making in general, but he's got some charts in there that are good percentage for alcohol. So I would say that's the general best approach, is just look it up for if you don't want to really dig into the chemistry and figuring that out for yourself. The other thing that's important is whether you're using fresh plant or dry plant. If the plant is fresh, there's a higher amount of water in it, so generally your alcohol percentage is going to be higher because the water in the plant is going to dilute your tincture. So that's an important consideration there too. Okay, Ian is asking, I'm realizing how important it is to begin to see planets and their qualities as personalities that can be found in different manifestations everywhere. With this in mind, I wonder if you could give some advice on how to enter into deeper, potentially more reciprocal relationships with the archetypes or entities that we know as the planets. Any anecdotes or personal stories or practices you've heard about or had success with would also be appreciated. Really, really good question there, Ian. I really appreciate your question because and I'm assuming you're astroherbalism or botanical constellation student. Because what you're saying right now is that's the way to learn astrology. That's the way to learn the planets and the archetypes, is to get it out of this, Tauruses are stubborn and Geminis are spaced out and talk too much, right? But it's to understand like you said, the personality of those archetypes and then grounding it and seeing it all around us. So one of the best ways to experience this for yourself is to start and this is a really great practice for everyone, is to start a moon journal. So what you do is you get yourself a journal and a pen and what you want to start doing is tracking the moon as it moves through the zodiac and how you feel, right? What you experience in your daily life. Because the moon represents your feelings, right? It's the closest planet to the earth. It's the closest thing to us. So it's very experiential. It's very tangible. It's very tactile. And one of the great ways that you can start to understand the archetypes of the signs is by just following the moon as it goes through the zodiac. And as you do that for a number of cycles, right, we got 13 lunar cycles in a year. So throughout a year, you'll get to experience the moon going through those signs 13 times. And eventually what starts to happen, you start to see a pattern, right? You start to see patterns of like, oh, interesting. Every time the moon goes into Gemini, or every time the moon goes into Aries, I get a headache. Or every time the moon goes into Libra, I have a conflict with my partner. Or every time the moon goes into Pisces, I start having all these wild dreams. So it's a way that you can start to get a sense for the experience and the feeling of those signs. So that's one way to do it. The other way involves getting your chart, your birth chart, and noting where and when the moon is going to cross your natal planets. So if you're looking at your birth chart and you see that you have, say, Mars in Gemini, and the moon is cruising along, it's at the end of Taurus, and then all of a sudden it's moving into Gemini, and then the moon hits that Mars, and all of a sudden, you notice that maybe you start to feel a little bit more restless, or you feel more energy, or maybe you feel agitated. Maybe your mind, Gemini, feels agitated, Mars. So then you kind of start to get a sense for the feeling, the experience within your own self of those archetypes. That's the best way to do it. And, another cool way to do it is through planetary timing mechanisms. So each of the 7 days of the week are governed by a planet, and then there's the hours of the day change based on their planetary ruler. So there's an app, I think it's just called Planetary Hours, that you can download and get on your phone. And based on your specific location and things like that, it'll calculate what the planetary hours are for you. And that's really, really cool, because then you'll be like noticing like, oh man, I feel really, really tired, I feel kind of heavy and tired, and it's, oh, interesting, it's the moon hour or something like that, right? And then all of a sudden, the energy shifts, and then you notice, oh, the planetary hour just changed. So that's a really good way of doing it as well. And then, of course, I would say a really good way of doing it too is like, as you study these archetypes, as you study the planets, as you study the signs, just pay attention, like maybe start getting some charts from your friends and your family and start looking at, oh, what planets are really strong in their chart, or signs are really strong in their chart. Paying attention to media, right? If you like to watch TV shows or movies or read stories or things like that, the archetypes are scattered all throughout them. So you can really see them in the characters of the stories that you like, right? So like, just so you all know a little personality bit of myself, I really love fantasy, right? So I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit of a dork and a nerd when it comes to stories, and I really like high fantasy, right? Like Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time and all these kinds of stories, right? And the reason I like them is because they're very archetypal stories, right? And the characters in them really embody certain archetypes, planets and signs especially. And one of my newest ones that I've really been enjoying over the years is, maybe some of you are any Game of Thrones fans in the house, maybe not. I know it's kind of horrible in certain ways, but it's so amazingly great in other ways. But for those of you that watch Game of Thrones or have read the books, The Songs of Ice and Fire, very archetypal. I mean, the characters in that story are like picture perfect examples of the planets, right? So you can really see it play out in story, in your own life. And those are some ways that I would encourage you and recommend for you to really kind of land the plane, so to speak, and to really feel and see and experience the planets and the archetypes for yourself. Great question, Ian. Let's see, Tanya is asking if I work with Bach flower essences. If so, have you made astrological connections between the essences and the planets? Can you use them in medical astrology? Great question, Tanya. I personally don't really work with flower essences anymore. I used to. And then the whole spagyric thing really came to me, and I really pretty much just exclusively started working with spagyrics as far as liquid extracts go. And the reason for that being is that, like a flower essence, the spagyrics still work on that kind of subtle level, right? We're working through, psychological and emotional dynamics, spiritual dynamics. But they also contain the chemical signatures of the plants, right? There's still chemistry there working on the body. So I really like that balance. But they absolutely can be used in conjunction with medical astrology for sure. So as you're learning the essences, just pay attention to kind of the qualities and characteristics that they operate on. And how those might correlate to the planets specifically, or the signs, or the elements even can be a really useful tool for kind of starting to get a sense for the archetypes of those essences and how they will heal. And those can definitely be used and incorporated into your work as a medical astrologer. And actually, there's a lot of medical astrologers that use flower essences, and a lot of flower essence practitioners that use medical astrology. So yeah, definitely do that. Nora is asking, do all oats at the milky stage have the tropho properties? Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess the only oats that I'm familiar with is Avena sativa. So that's the only one that I can say with confidence does have that property. I'm not saying that perhaps other species of oats don't have that property. I'm really not sure. I hate to say that, but I have to when I don't. So I'm not sure, Nora. I would imagine possibly, yeah, but that's something you just have to experiment with. Yeah. Stream is asking, I have questions about herbal preparations. How long do you leave your spagyrics in alcohol? Okay, there's a lot of questions here, so I'll take them one at a time. The spagyrics generally macerate for about 40 days and 40 nights. Do you use vinegars? I don't use a whole lot of vinegars. Generally, if we're going to do vinegar, it's more for like a culinary preparation. I haven't made a vinegar in a really long time. The one area that I think vinegars is really excellent is one for mineral extractions. So if you're doing like, you're wanting to do like a mineral kind of tonic type formula, doing that in vinegar is really great. So that would be, if you made like alfalfa, nettles, red raspberry, things like that. Really, really good as a vinegar. And then also there's a preparation called an oxymel, which is a really cool preparation where you combine a vinegar extract with a honey extract. And those are really, really nice, especially for the respiratory system. The other way vinegar is helpful is in the extraction of alkaloids. So typically, in order for alkaloids to be extracted, we want to use an acidic menstruum. This is especially important if you're even tincturing herbs, that you test the water. This is for people that want to get really granular with it, but if you're making tinctures of plants with alkaloids, and typically you're combining alcohol and water, well, you want to make sure that your water isn't overly alkaline. because alkaline water doesn't extract alkaloids very well, right? You actually want the pH of your water to be slightly on the acidic side. So if you have really alkaline water, sometimes people will actually put a little bit of vinegar in their water to make it more acidic to optimize their alkaloidal extractions. So yeah, that's a little bit of the difference between vinegar and alcohol tinctures. Basically, you know, a vinegar is primarily going to get water soluble and lower range alcohol soluble chemistry, whereas alcohol tinctures are going to get a lot more of the volatile components and resins that vinegar is going to have a little bit of a trickier time extracting. As far as vinegar extracting the sulfur and mercury of a plant, I wouldn't say it does, and here's why. Because in alchemy, it's really the alcohol that's going to draw that out, because alcohol is the mercury of the plant, right? That alcohol is one of those primary philosophical principles, right? So that's why, to me, a true spagyric is really contains alcohol. Right, and you're talking about the spagyric vinegar. You can, for sure. Like, you can make a vinegar tincture, press it out, calcine the herbs, crystallize the minerals, and add the minerals back into the vinegar. So you kind of have like a spagyric vinegar, for sure. So that can be done. Whether the vinegar is actually going to draw out the sulfur and the mercury, it's hard to say. I would have to talk to my teacher, Robert Bartlett, about that in more detail, actually, because there are certain works with vinegar in, especially more the metallic alchemy. They use vinegar to work with the metals a lot more than they do with the plants. So, yeah. Great questions there, Stream, about the tinctures and medicine making and spagyrics and all that. Okay, so we got Jean and Sasha asking about skullcap capsules. Yes, absolutely. Skullcap capsules will definitely have everything, right? Because you're getting the whole plant. And that's kind of the beauty of taking powders or capsules, right? Is that you're getting the whole herb, right? You don't have to question, oh, am I missing this component of the plant because I extracted it in this, water or alcohol or vinegar or whatever. You take a powder, you take a capsule, you get everything. So that's kind of the beauty of just taking capsules. But like I said, the problem with capsules is that, sometimes the quality in the capsules can be a bit questionable. And then Jean is also asking, on top of that, using skullcap, do you take the liver enzymes into account? I'm not totally sure where you're coming from on that. Have you heard that skullcap affects liver enzymes in a negative way? I'm not totally sure. You're mentioning cytochrome P liver systems there. Maybe you'll have to clarify that one, Jean. I'm not totally following that. Casey is asking, top 3 Ayurveda books. Well, that's a fun question. Okay, so, as far as herb stuff goes, The Yoga of Herbs, hands down, is awesome. I really like that book. It's not without some flaws. There is a little bit of incorrect stuff in there, specifically in regards to some of the ways some of the Western herbs are classified according to their energetics and doshas and things like that. But nonetheless, it's an awesome book. Great intro to Ayurveda with a specific orientation around herbalism. So that one's really, really good. There's one that I really, really like called Secrets of Healing. Ayurveda Secrets of Healing by Maya Tiwari, Tiwari. And that's a really cool book that goes into just more, just broader spectrum of Ayurvedic therapeutics. So it kind of gets into more of the body work stuff, and just it branches out into a lot of the bigger therapies that are a part of Ayurveda. So that's a really cool book. I like that one. She also has some really interesting stuff talking about memory and kind of how part of the process of healing is kind of opening up layers of memory, or personal memory, collective memory, cosmic memory. It's pretty cool stuff. And then, a really simple book, but it's got loads of really great practical information, is Dr. Laud's, I think it's just called Ayurvedic Book of Home Remedies. Let's see, it's not on it's not on this shelf, but that one's really, really good. And then really, you have to get his course to get this book. But for those of you all that are interested in Ayurveda, I highly, highly, highly recommend Todd Caldicott's Inside Ayurveda. That course is amazing, very, very detailed, and his book it's a textbook. It goes really, really deep. Okay, that's 4 books, but those are some of my favorites, Casey. Zarad is asking, in your lobelia sheet, you suggest skullcap and lobelia for mental anxiety. In what proportions? That's interesting. I generally wouldn't think of lobelia so much for mental anxiety. Skullcap, definitely. I'm wondering if that's in the lobelia monograph, possibly. But boy, that just doesn't sound like something I would combine. But it's possible I did. Yes, so generally speaking, with lobelia, this is a remedy that, for the most part, is used in lower doses. Because it is emetic, right? So it can induce some nausea and potentially vomiting if taken in high enough doses. And sometimes that doesn't require much, like sometimes 3 drops and someone is throwing up. Some people are really sensitive to lobelia. So generally when I'm combining it, using it in pretty low amounts, generally 5% to maybe 10% of a formula. 10% is really high. Generally it's about 5% or maybe even less. So if this is just a simple pair of lobelia and skullcap, I would do that, maybe 90% lobelia, 90% skullcap, 10% lobelia, or even 95 skullcap, 5% lobelia. I'm really curious where you're seeing that, because that just doesn't sound like something I would put together. But for the respiratory system, so I would use that more for like respiratory spasm, or maybe someone that can't sleep at night because of a cough. That would be a really good pair in that way. Winona is asking, okay, hold on, I gotta rub my eyes. Sometimes looking at camera to screen, it makes my eyes kind of do strange things. Winona is asking, what do I look for to choose herbs that are not standardized? You talk about how standardized herbs are not the best choice. So how do I choose quality herbs when I'm unable to grow them and have to buy them and have them sent in myself due to no local health food stores? Yeah, great question there, Winona. I mean, you do the best you can with you just do the best that you can. I think for me, the standardized extracts, to me, it's more of a philosophical thing, I think, than anything else. I just trust in the intelligence of the earth and nature to create things the way they're meant to be. And yeah, there's something about just the standardized extracts that for me just doesn't resonate. That doesn't mean it has to be that way for everyone. Lots of people use standardized extracts and they have great results. So I'm not saying that you have to think the way I think. Sometimes I have opinions about things, and maybe I share them a little too freely, so I don't want you to adopt my opinions on things if it doesn't resonate with you, right? And that's one way I always like to encourage all of my students, is I want you to, find your own way that works for you. And if that is the same as mine, great. If not, great. Lots of different pathways to the same mountaintop. So generally speaking, I think it's just good to find reputable suppliers of herbs. If you're and I'm assuming we're talking about bulk herbs, like dried herbs. So it's really good to research and just do some digging to see if there are any local herb farms, like any farms in your area. If there's anyone growing medicinal plants relatively close to you that you can contact and get plants from, that's the most ideal. And you'd be surprised, sometimes, starting to go around local farmers markets or just, getting on Google and searching in your area. There's a lot of really big companies. I'm hesitant to say any names, but, there's a lot of really big herb companies out there. And sometimes their herbs sit on the shelf for a while. So if I'm buying bulk herbs, I want to get them fresh. That's really or freshly dried, that they can provide like what they call a C of A, or a certificate of authenticity, and that's going to tell me when it was harvested, when it was processed, so I know how old it is, right? And if something's like over a year old, I'm like, no, I don't want it. I want the freshest herbs possible. So it just takes kind of doing some research. We've got people that we work with out here on the West Coast, but maybe you're out east, or maybe you're somewhere else in the world, and that's not maybe that wouldn't be the most viable option for you. So as far as extracts go, just standard tinctures are great. If you just find someone that's making tinctures, there's a lot of big companies, Herb Farm and Gaia Herbs and all that. They all make tinctures. A lot of them are really quality extracts from my understanding of them. I think it's just kind of finding the brands that you really like and that you like to work with, and that you've taken them and you've felt the effects within yourself, and that you can stand behind it, with confidence. Yeah, I think that's my take on that, Winona. Great question. Let's see. Jade Rose is asking, could you discuss alcohol-based tinctures versus non-alcohol tinctures? Is one better than the other? Okay. Yeah. So, I feel like I've mentioned this a little bit throughout this. There's been a lot of questions about extractions and stuff here, so which is great. So yeah, as far as non-alcohol tinctures, there's generally kind of a few different categories of that. Basically, for the most part, it's glycerin-based tinctures. And then we were talking about vinegars a minute ago. Since I already talked about vinegars, I'll maybe juxtapose alcohol tinctures versus glycerin. So here's the thing. Glycerin is basically, most glycerin that's used is kind of like an industrial waste product. Like the way in which glycerin is manufactured is, in my personal opinion, it's kind of gnarly. And it's not really something that I feel like is totally natural. And it's not something that I feel like I can really get behind and feel good about. That's just my personal opinion, right? Okay, if you think otherwise or feel otherwise, that's totally cool. And I totally honor and respect that. So I don't want you to think that my way is the only way. I never want anyone to think that I'm like, I always try to be as, really open and fluid and flexible as possible, but I do have my take on things. The thing about glycerin is that it predominantly extracts water-soluble to low-range alcohol-soluble constituents. So glycerin is not going to draw out resins or volatile oils, or oftentimes even things like saponins. These constituents that are more soluble in a higher alcohol percentage will not be drawn out by glycerin. So you kind of run into some basically practical extraction dynamics here with glycerin, where some herbs it can work really well for, and a lot of herbs it won't. That's why I just personally prefer alcohol, because it's very, very versatile and it gets you the broadest spectrum of extraction really possible. It's very well preserved and really convenient for people to take too. So that's kind of my take on alcohol versus non-alcohol tinctures. And again, while I tend to prefer alcohol-based tinctures, for someone that say, they just can't taste alcohol for, maybe they have a alcohol problem, right? Then glycerin's great. Go for it. Use it by all means. If I'm working with someone that has issues like that, generally I'm going to work with, powders, teas, capsules, things like that. Let's see. Tanya is asking, what are some of your future plans for the School of Evolutionary Herbalism? Well, that's a fun question. That's an exciting question. That's a dangerous question. I could talk about that one for a long time. Well, there's one thing about me is that I always have way more ideas than I have time to implement, which we're trying to, change that so that I can have more time to implement some of the visions and ideas that I've got. Because I have a lot of ideas for continuing to grow and expand the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. I think on the immediate horizon is basically, as I mentioned earlier, revamping a lot of the programs. As some of you might have noticed, some of the videos in the programs are, to me, they feel a little outdated. I mean, some of them, like, I still have dreadlocks. Some of them, as I'm sure you can tell, I was still pretty new to camera, talking to a camera. So, I mean, I've seen some of those videos, just little bits, and I'm like, I seem so awkward in front of the camera. It's like embarrassing. And I'm always learning too, right? I've learned a lot since some of that material. I'm always learning, I'm always growing, I'm always refining. So I really want to basically revamp all the programs, reshoot all the content. We want to design a whole new portal, have more integration quizzes and tests. We do have the tracking system in there now, which is a huge development. That was a big project to get that in there. And along with that, having certificates of completion, now that we can tell if someone's gone through the whole course and completed it, having certificates of completion. And, I have ideas and visions for creating more in-depth certification, creating, and this actually ties into Terry's question, which is there going to be any live workshops, live class possibilities, which is, and that's something I really want to dig into more is rather than doing kind of single one-off workshops, but really, get a serious group of students that really want to learn this work. Like, they really want to get the medical astrology and the assessments and the formulation and the spagyrics and kind of my whole approach. Get a group of really dedicated folks and dig in and go for it. I'd like to be having clinics, doing group clinics, doing group case study roundtables, kind of have a little bit more of like a deeper level apprenticeship with small groups, and creating curriculum also that can help you all submit to become registered with the American Herbalist Guild. That's something that we're looking at developing in the future. Creating curriculum that can move you towards becoming an RH with the AHG, and then once that's done, going deeper and us having our own internal EH Evolutionary Herbalist certification. So these are just kind of some of the big picture visions. I have no idea how long it's going to take to implement any of that, but if one thing is for certain, it's that if you stick with me, new things will come. Sometimes it takes a little longer than y'all want, but I have a lot of really cool ideas to just take you deeper and continue to support you on your plant path and provide you with more teachings, more support, and help you become that herbalist that you want to become. So that was a really fun question. Thanks. I always get excited for a chance to share some of my inspiration and things that I really want to do. And one thing is, for me, it's like I'm really committed to this School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and this is my life. Like, this is what I do. And I just want to do everything in my power to make it better and to make it awesome and to create a community, you know. And that's one thing that I really want to do more too, is kind of figure out ways to just strengthen the community feeling of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And I know, you know, it's all, you know, for the most folks, it's mostly digital and things like that. But oh, hello. Well, no, we got a new puppy the other day. Maybe I should show the puppy. Come here. Come here. Okay, maybe not. He's like really excited and wants to play. We got a puppy the other day, and it is very excited right now. And it's probably wondering what. I think it thinks I'm talking. She thinks I'm talking to her. Hey, Whitney, can you maybe the puppy? So, anyways, thank you all. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's fun. So, okay. Hillary, yes, you're asking a question about glycerin. I just mentioned that. So we covered that one. Okay, everybody. Lauren's asking about wild lettuce. How do I use it? I do use it, a pretty significant amount, actually. I've really grown to love wild lettuce a lot. So wild lettuce, Lactuca, the common species you'll see is Lactuca virosa. The one I primarily use is Lactuca scariola. It just popped up everywhere on the property down in Oregon. And so we use that. We prepared it as a dual extract, meaning a very high alcohol extract. And then we took the same herb and boiled it down to kind of a thick resin and then combined those two together, and whoo, it is strong. So taste, bitter, really bitter. It's got a little bit of acridness to it, but mostly it's pretty much bitter. Its affinities are for the nervous system, and through its affinity through the nerves, it influences smooth and skeletal muscles. And it also has kind of an overall pectoral affinity, so kind of the chest region, lungs, heart. And the primary action, this is a nervine hypnotic, strong nervine hypnotic, meaning that it will sedate you significantly. And because of that, it has anodyne properties or pain relieving properties. And because of that, it also has antispasmodic properties. Energetics, it's cold, dry, and relaxant. And for those of you that are students of Matthew Wood, I know it gets a little confusing because he says wild lettuce is for cold entering the liver meridian. But you have to remember Matthew Wood is using drop doses. So his usage is homeopathic, and so it's opposite there. So standard herb doses, 15 drops, 30 drops, whatever, that's going to be cooling. But drop dose or homeopathic dose, we'll see it flip, and it's actually used to treat cold. So more that like treat light kind of dynamic. I use wild lettuce for pain. That's really one of the main ways that I use it. I use it for spasmodic pain. I use it for muscle pain, joint pain, injury. Last fall, I pretty seriously injured my back to the point where I was actually having a really hard time walking. I was on a cane. I couldn't really move for a few weeks. And I was dosing wild lettuce pretty heavily to the point where I felt pretty sedated throughout the day. But it really helped with the pain. I didn't have to take any kind of pain meds or anything like that. I just stuck with pretty much wild lettuce, Jamaican dogwood, and California poppy. Those were kind of my three main herbs there. So yeah, I use it a lot for pain. And it also use it for insomnia, severe insomnia, difficulty sleeping. And what's the other main usage? Oh, and then spasmodic coughs that keep you up at night. So that's another really specific way I've used it. People really irritable respiratory tract infection, really, it's like they take a breath in and it's like, whoa, and then they start coughing and they can't stop coughing because the respiratory system's really tense and hot and irritable. And then when they go to lay down, it gets a lot worse. And so that cough keeps them up at night. So I use wild lettuce there very specifically, and it works really well. So that's just a little bit on wild lettuce, some of the ways that I use it. I should do a Materia Medica Monthly on wild lettuce. I really like that plant quite a bit. Let's see. Jeremiah is asking, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your book. Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate that. Gotten through the amazing intro and going to be absorbed into much as I can over the weekend. Thank you, Jeremiah. It's funny because I've read that book so many times, and I actually, admittedly, I really actually strongly dislike the introduction and the first chapter of that book, but it got to be a point where it was too late and I couldn't change anything or rewrite it. So part of me got really scared on the release day. I was like, oh, I hope people just skip the first little bit. Anyways, that's just me being overly critical on myself. What would be your top herbs for damp heat tissue state? Yeah, good question, Jeremiah. So damp heat. So in tissue state terminology, that's going to be like damp stagnation combined with heat excitation. This tissue state, this combination of dampness and heat, pretty much universally calls for alteratives. This tissue state, very common in the GI with food intolerance, really common in the liver, blood, lymphatics, a lot of skin conditions. It's what the old doctors called bad blood syndrome. Damp heat, puffy, swollen, arthritic joints, damp heat, hot, inflamed, weeping eczema, damp heat. Alternatives. So usually bitter herbs that will drain dampness and cool excessive heat are really, really indicated here. Dandelion root and leaf are both excellent here. Oregon grape is excellent here. I really love cleavers and red clover here, more for the lymphatics. Figwort for the lymphatics. Red root, excellent damp heat remedy. Very, very drying, very cooling, very astringent, especially for spleen lymphatics. Portal circulation, liver, really, really good remedy there, red root. Let's see. Echinacea actually is really good for damp heat patterns. Pretty much honestly, Jeremiah, the alterative category as a whole is that's pretty much the category we use for damp heat. Yeah, but bitters in particular there are really, really great. Okay. All right, y'all, I think I'll be able to I'm going to try to scroll through here and find some folks who I have not answered a question. Because I think I'm starting to space out a little bit. It's been about an hour and a half. And I think I might have to call it an evening. As you can tell, I am spacing out here. Okay, Jeff is... Huh? What?
You done?
No, I'm just spacing out and trying to answer another few questions. Yes, Jeff is asking cordyceps for lung tissue damage. Anything else to be added? Well, good one. Cordyceps, key there. I was taught by Matthew Becker that elecampane is really, really excellent there as a lung tonic and trophorestorative. It is pretty warming, so be a little cautious if there's heat patterns there. I would also consider things that are going to just work on the mucous membrane, such as marshmallow, licorice. Those would be really, really great. Oh, mullein. I really like mullein here, especially if there's damaged alveoli or damaged cilia. You've got that signature of the cilia with all the hairs all over mullein. That one's really, really good there too. Lauren's asking about the moon journal. Are you talking just about new moons? No, just follow the moon as it moves through the signs of the zodiac. So as you follow the moon through the signs of the zodiac, and just keeping track. So every day you're looking at what sign is the moon in. and then kind of journaling on how you feel. And then you can keep track of when the moon conjuncts certain planets. So yeah, that's really good. Oh, okay. So I gotta answer this one. Christopher is asking if I've read Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive. Yes, I have read The Stormlight Archive. The first 3 books, I'm waiting on the 4th one. Amazing books. Oh my goodness. Love Brandon Sanderson. And he did a really great job finishing The Wheel of Time. So sorry, y'all. I just had to have a little bit of a fantasy nerd moment here with Christopher. Yes, that's so great. Michelle asking recommendations on where to get natal birth chart done. I just use astro.com. You can get a free account with them. You can get up to 50 charts for free on astro.com. That's a really great resource. Favorite Materia Medica books? Well, there's a lot. Okay, favorite Materia Medica books are, oh yeah, okay, so there's a blog post, good call Whitney. So there's a blog post, so if you go to evolutionaryherbalism.com/blog, scroll through the blog, there's a blog post in there that we did, I think called Building Your Herbal Library. And it's a super extensive list of all kinds of book recommendations that I've got. Yes. Rachel asking, experience with using herbs for pets? I don't. There's some people that have worked a lot with animals. I haven't worked with animals too much. Yeah, I don't have any experience with working with animals. Lori's asking about moonshine. How do you feel about making tinctures with this? Yeah, definitely. I mean, moonshine, that's just home distilled alcohol. That's great. If you want to get really nerdy about it, you can start following planetary timing mechanisms and have distilled alcohols for each planet, and then use those alcohols to tincture plants that attribute to that planet, right? So 7 alcohols, 1 for each planet. That you can get that precise with it with alcohol. 50-50 mix of alcohol and glycerin. Yeah, if you like doing that, go for it. There's no harm in mixing it. And it makes your tinctures taste a lot better that way too. Francisca is asking, can you speak to the use of herbs in vaginal steaming? I facilitate the practice and it's incredibly effective. Can you talk about how herbs act on the mucosal membranes of the vaginal tissue during steaming? I do not know anything about that, Francisca. I apologize. I do have a friend down in Oregon that I think she knows a lot about that. Her name's Anya Robinson. I think that's her last name. But yeah, I have heard of doing this for treating local, things like infections or even prolapse and things like that. Obviously, you're steaming, right? So you're only going to get volatile compounds such as essential oils and things like that. Generally speaking, that's going to be having obviously differing from herb to herb, but generally that's going to have an antiseptic effect. Generally that's going to have, just antiseptic, antimicrobial actions. I'm sure others, modulating inflammation, things like that. But otherwise I don't really know too much about it.
Rosita Arvigo has a lot of information because it's like a common practice in Central American herbalism, and some of the most common herbs they use is like marigold and oregano and calendula.
Oh.
Some of those are aromatic.
Okay. Yeah. So Rosita Arvigo is a good resource for you there. All right, y'all. One more question, and then I think I'm going to have to call it an evening. Been about an hour and a half here. And thank you all for being here with me. Thanks for sticking it through. I know we got a handful of you left. Okay. Natalia has a neat question here. How do you recommend to introduce ourselves to a new plant? One large dose of the plant, plant communication, meditation, ceremony, communion, various days of intakes. I'm wondering in case where you don't want to take it periodically, but when feeling called. Example, cacao, blue lotus, even ginseng. Cool question, Natalia. So, and I like this question because it really hits, to me, one of the most important aspects of being an herbalist, right? And that is having direct relationships with the plants that you work with. You know, if there's one thing that I would encourage each and every one of my students, no matter what program you're in, no matter whether you consider yourself beginning, intermediate, advanced, super, ultra, amazing clinical practitioner, we have to have a relationship with the plants that we work with. And I think the more that we can work with the plants that grow in our environment, even better. So when you're getting to know a new plant, I always encourage people to, if you can, interact with it in person. If you can see it growing in the wild, to understand where it grows, what its shape and color and texture is, just the nature of that plant's being, to be able to talk to it, to pray to it, to sit with it, to make an offering to it. These are all incredible ways to just establish that connection and relationship, because those plants are alive, they're sentient, they're aware of you in a similar way that you're aware of them. And I think nothing can replace that direct interaction with the alive, growing plant. From there, as you're working with it, you know, to me, ingesting the plant in a variety of ways is really, really great. I think a good way of doing that is actually limiting your intake of other herbs. So for me, it's really good to just one plant. Like, okay, I'm working with this plant, I'm gonna get to know this plant, and maybe spend like a month just focused on that plant, right? So you get some of the herb, and maybe you take a tincture and a flower essence and take a bath with it and decoct it, infuse it, smell it, just infuse that plant into your life in as many different ways as you can. If you're working with doses, maybe play around with like a drop dose 3 times a day for a few weeks. What happens? Take 5 milliliters 3 times a day for a few weeks. See what happens. Like, experience the spectrum of dosage with that plant so that you understand what it's going to do, how it's going to interact with your being, with your body, with your mind, and that really gives you a feeling, a felt sense of how that plant is going to, what that plant does, and so that you're going to better know and predict what it's going to do when you administer it to someone. So those are just some simple ways that I encourage people to learn about a new plant. So to balance your intellectual studies with a tactile experience, right? Your heart and your mind both should work together in the ways that you approach studying a plant and learning a plant. And I think that's a really, really important thing for us to all do. And to always remember, even those plants that you think you know all the way, the nettles, the calendula, the lavender, the peppermint, right? The plants that can sometimes be really easy to overlook because we're like, yeah, I already know about that plant. What's the next new exciting one, right? Don't overlook those medicines. They still have a lot to teach us, and we can never know everything there is to know about a medicinal plant. And with that, I want to thank you all for sticking it through with me here. Been about an hour and 40 minutes here on this live Q&A call. And I want to thank you for joining me here. I want to thank you for being in whichever evolutionary herbalism program you're in. Keep at it. One lesson, one video, one module at a time. I know some of these programs are absolutely massive, and I know it can get a little bit overwhelming, but just take it one lesson at a time, one module at a time. Try to get on a good rhythm in there, try to get on a good consistency. Just maybe a video a week, maybe a video a week. And really, that's a great approach to just gradually chunking out the program, making your way through it. Post in the comment section. I know I wasn't able to get to everyone's question today, and for that I do apologize. And Please know that I will answer your questions in the comments area. I apologize that I know sometimes it takes me a little bit of time to get in there. My life has been a little chaotic and hectic lately, so it's taken me a little bit of time, but right now there are 0 comments in there because I answered all of them over the last few days. So I will get to them. It just sometimes takes me a little bit of time to get to them. So thanks for your patience. And I really just again want to honor you and thank you and send my gratitude and appreciation to you for being a part of this amazing community of people that are committed to the healing power of plants, to helping this world become a better place, and to healing themselves so that they can better heal others. So thanks y'all for being here with me. Keep an eye on your inbox. I'm going to keep doing these Q&A webinars. Generally do them about every quarter. So keep an eye out. Join me. And I know some of y'all were having a little bit of technical difficulties today. This will be uploaded into the members area, and I'll drop everyone an email as soon as that's ready. So thanks so much. Have a great weekend, everyone. And until next time, take care and be well.